Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, August 3rd. This is Africa 54.
As refugees cross the channel in small boats, Britain seeks to criminalize irregular migration. U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, Akuna Cook, reveals the U.S. plan to help Africa combat COVID-19. And after a long struggle for rights and recognition, Kenya grants citizenship to the ethnic Shona community.
More than 24 people are the latest group among hundreds of migrants rescued from the Mediterranean Sea during the past 3 days. 26 people were rescued Monday from a sinking boat on the Mediterranean Sea following a weekend of operations in what is the busiest period for migrant crossings. German charity Sea Watch said it saved 12 other people Sunday. In the first operation Saturday, 57 people in distress were rescued from a rubber boat by the crew of the SOS Mediterranean Ocean Viking ship. A group of charity ships rescued nearly 450 migrants from a wooden boat taking on water in the Mediterranean Sea this past weekend. The charity groups are awaiting permission to dock at some southern European port to disembark their passengers. A record number of migrants have crossed the English Channel this year from France to Britain in small boats. The British government says it is aiming to deter the migrants by making it a criminal offence to arrive in the country without permission. Henry Ridgewell explains from London.
Across the world's busiest shipping lane, in overloaded rubber dinghies, dozens or sometimes hundreds of migrants are crossing from France to Britain to seek asylum almost every day. This group was filmed a short way off the British coastline last month, apparently having rowed the 30 kilometres across the channel.
Where are you from? Sudan. You have no engine?
We don't have engine here.
You have enough water? You have something to drink?
No. Yeah. No. We just have a water here. We took it and...
The migrants come from many different countries in Africa, the Middle East and South Asia, most fleeing conflict or poverty. A record 430 people made the crossing in a single day last month. The total for 2021 so far stands at some 8,500, higher than the number for all of 2020. Speaking last month, Britain's Home Secretary said the government would take action to stop the migrants arriving.
What we're seeing right now, effectively people trafficking, smugglers, criminal gangs exploiting our asylum system to bring in economic migrants and people that, quite frankly, are circumventing our legal migration routes, coming to our country illegally.
The spike in arrivals has embroiled Britain's revered sea rescue charity, the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, which has helped migrants at sea. Critics accuse the charity of providing a taxi service to Britain. The RNLI says it helps anyone in distress, regardless of who they are. The government is putting forward new legislation which could see migrants who enter Britain without permission facing up to 4 years in prison. Bridget Chapman works at Kent Refugee Action Network, a charity supporting migrants arriving across the English Channel.
It flies in the face of international law. You know, the Geneva Convention states that people have a right to seek asylum, and it can be in a country of their choosing. It feels very deliberately punitive. It feels like saber rattling. It feels like a lot of tough talk to make people feel that the UK is not a welcoming place. The fact is that that's not going to stop people from coming.
A committee of British lawmakers last week strongly criticised the living conditions for newly arrived migrants in the port of Dover, with refugee children seen sleeping on the floors of reception centres. The local Kent authority says it can no longer cope with the number of arrivals. At the same time, Britain has given France $75 million to beef up policing of the northern French coastline to try to intercept migrants, on top of $39 million given by Britain last year. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
At least 30 bodies have washed up on the Sudanese banks of a river that adjoins Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray, according to 2 Ethiopian refugees and 4 Sudanese witnesses who told Reuters on Monday they have retrieved the bodies. The bodies were found in the Setit River, known in Ethiopia as the Tekeze, which is the current de facto borderline between the territory controlled by Tigrayan forces and those controlled by Amhara forces allied with Ethiopia's federal government. Dr. Tewodros Tefera, a surgeon who escaped from the Ethiopian border town of Humera, told Reuters he buried 10 bodies over the past 6 days in Sudan and was told by local fishermen and refugees another 28 had been recovered, including 7 on Monday. Resident doctors in Nigerian public hospitals are on day 2 of a strike on Tuesday over grievances that include the delayed payment of salaries and allowances, according to the doctors' union. This comes amid the country's rising COVID-19 infections. Nigerian doctors frequently strike over what they say are poor conditions of service. Last year, they walked out from their jobs 3 times, including over demands for an allowance for treating coronavirus patients. Dr. Roland Aibovo, the treasurer of Nigerian Medical Association, Abuja chapter, says some members are owed up to 10 months back pay. Aibovo told Reuters doctors can only give their best if all the enabling environment is provided. Lagos state officials say the decision by the doctors was hasty and are appealing for restraint. Kenyan officials have given citizenship to 1,600 stateless Shona community in the country 50 years after their ancestors migrated. The ethnic Shona, who have been struggling as stateless people for rights and benefits, celebrated their new status. Lene Ruvaga reports from Nairobi.
With a spring in her step and her ID in hand, Sheba Mungani makes her way to withdraw money sent to her by a customer from an agent for M-Pesa, a mobile phone-based money transfer service. For more than 20 years, Mungani has been weaving baskets to earn a living. Access to financial credit through banks and other financial services has been a major stumbling block for her and other women from her community. Mungani is Shona. The community has been pushing for change to gain recognition from the Kenyan government for decades. Only recently, about 1,600 members were recognized as citizens of Kenya and symbolically given identification cards.
Before getting the legal status of citizenship and an ID, it was really tough. When an employment opportunity arose and you went without an ID, then you would miss out on the opportunity. Also, our telephone lines would be registered for us by third parties, who at times were not honest in terms of remitting all the money that was due to us.
The Shona migrated to Kenya around 50 years ago as missionaries from Zimbabwe and Zambia at the invitation of the country's founding president. Nosizin Dube is one of the lucky few Shona who have had a chance to further their education. She is an economics student at the University of Nairobi. In between helping her aunt sell basketware, she takes breaks to study. With a change of legal status, Ndube says she is now hopeful of scaling even greater heights.
Actually, it feels very fine and very great. Right now, I'll be able to access my formal education, challenges, and formal employment also, and to be able to travel abroad to accomplish further studies, yeah.
But some say the Shona still face challenges, even when some opportunities are granted. Robert Waweru is with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, an independent civil rights organization that advocates for human rights and democratic reforms. He says the community may continue to lag behind because they have historically been neglected.
It will take years for them to catch up with the rest of the country in terms of their literacy level. They have not been able to go to school for all those years for lack of documentation. Socioeconomically, they lag behind because they exist also on the fringes of the economy. It will take a longer time for them to integrate into the mainstream economy.
According to the United Nations, there are about 715,000 stateless people living in Africa. With the citizenship status now accorded to the Shona, they effectively become the country's 45th community. For Ndube's generation, this might mean getting more access to education and future opportunities. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi, Kenya.
The White House is in the process of delivering 25 million vaccine doses to African countries in a massive effort to help the continent overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. Heidi Adams, host of VOA's Straight Talk Africa program, spoke with Akuna Cook, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, about how the effort is going.
Deputy Assistant Secretary Akuna Cook, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Madam, these are difficult times all over the world. In Africa, only about 1% of the continent's population is fully vaccinated. Please tell us more about what the United States is doing to get much-needed vaccines to African countries and where those doses are going first.
Well, Haiti, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, particularly talking about this topic of ending the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a top priority of the Biden-Harris administration. The president has been very clear that we have to approach vaccine contributions around the world with the same urgency that we have here in the United States. And so we are working tirelessly to get out this first tranche of 25 million doses to Africa. We have already, in the past 2 weeks or so, donated the first 5 million doses into 16 African countries. Burkina Faso and Djibouti were among the first. But there's many more coming, and in fact, this weekend, we will be delivering the largest sum of doses to any country to South Africa at 5.6 million doses, and then to Nigeria at just over 4 million doses coming up. And so this is just the beginning. These are the initial tranches. We remain the largest contributor to COVAX and are committed to getting vaccines out as quickly as possible, because we know that we cannot end this pandemic anywhere until we've ended it everywhere.
And of course, dose sharing is critical for those most at risk. You mentioned South Africa. We see the situation there, and of course, countries that are heading in that direction as well. The World Health Organization says Africa needs about 200 million doses to vaccinate 10% of its population by September this year. Is the United States prepared to do more? Is this a once-off donation? Of course, nobody wants to look a gift horse in the mouth here. Countries need as much as they can get. But will the United States down the line be prepared and ready to give more?
So our vaccine contributions are, they're multi-tiered and multi-layered, right? So these this initial tranche of 25 million, it's the first step. But we're also doing other things, including supporting vaccine manufacturing on the continent. And so we have invested in vaccine manufacturing in South Africa and in Senegal to ensure that Africa can then produce its own vaccines moving forward. We are also providing economic assistance to countries that have been impacted by COVID-19 with over $541 million in assistance to respond to the economic after effects of the pandemic. And so this is just the beginning. This is an initial tranche of our assistance, and I'm sure that we will see more rolling out over the next couple of months.
Ma'am, something we are seeing in the United States and something that is very prevalent across the African continent is misinformation around vaccines. There is a lack of trust as people feel that in the past, Africans have been used as guinea pigs for scientific experiments. And of course, there's an element of that here in the United States as well. What is your message to people in Africa about taking a vaccine coming from the West? How can they feel safe to trust the vaccines?
Well, what I will say is we absolutely acknowledge that there have been past reasons for there to be mistrust here in the United States and around the world. But it is absolutely the case that these vaccines are safe and they are effective. And we are working to disseminate best practices, including working with trusted messengers to get the word out that these vaccines are safe and that they are effective, and that it's absolutely critical that populations around the world, including here in the United States, avail themselves of these vaccines so that we can end this pandemic once and for all.
Deputy Assistant Secretary Akuna Cook, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Haiti.
That was Haiti Adams, host of VOA Straight Talk Africa, speaking with Akuna Cook, the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Tell us what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Next up, Zimbabwe's first black swimmer at the 2020 Olympic Games gives hope in a sport where black swimmers have long been underrepresented. Stay with us.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, should presidents and prime ministers be investigated for alleged crimes after they leave office? Is this good for democracy? We'll discuss the deadly fallout from the jailing of former South African President Jacob Zuma. Our panel will look at countries that have done it, like France and Israel, as well as those grappling with that question. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
U.S. Senate Republicans blocked a vote on a major package of democratic voting rights reforms earlier this summer, part of a broader state-by-state battle between the two parties over revamping election laws following the 2020 presidential election. As VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson explains, Republicans are calling for safeguards on election integrity, while Democrats want to expand access for voters.
The bitter fight over election reform arrived at Congress's front door, where more than 50 Texas Democrats gathered after fleeing their state to prevent passage of a Republican bill they said severely restricted voting for minorities in the wake of the 2020 election.
Trump lost the election.
Since former President Donald Trump insisted without proof the election was rigged against him, 17 states have passed 28 laws with new restrictions on voting. And in July, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a key decision giving states broader powers to impose restrictions on voting. Advocates say the Democrats' legislation bottled up in the Senate would eliminate many of those restrictions.
The For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act will actually look for ways to modernize how we do our elections, and then also to make sure that marginalized groups who have been discriminated against historically are able to vote.
Senate Democrats have so far struggled to pass those bills, even as the Biden administration has vowed to keep fighting.
This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process?
But with only a slim majority, Democrats have no chance of securing the 10 Republican votes needed in the Senate to pass legislation. Republicans want the states to support more rigorous voter identification and ballot security measures.
These measures are designed to provide order and secure the elections and provide confidence in the results.
And conservative analysts argue elections should not be regulated from Washington, D.C.
The states are each responsible for running their elections. This bill, H.R. 1, which Democrats are urging Congress to pass, would lead to a federal takeover of the administration of elections across the country. It has many other changes like that that, in essence, get rid of the kind of basic security and safety protocols and measures that states put in place to try to safeguard the integrity and security of the election process.
But Democrats are hopeful public opinion is on their side, arguing that the voting rights reforms they advocate will help hold the government accountable.
If you just poll people across the nation, Republicans and Independents and Democrats, they all want to take on gerrymandering. They all want to take on dark money that allows billionaires and corporations to buy elections. They all want to protect the ballot box as the pulsating heart of our republic.
Civil rights leaders are calling for thousands to march on the nation's capital on August 28th to keep the pressure on lawmakers to pass those reforms. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
After the U.S. National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA, announced that student athletes could profit off their name, image, and likeness, international student athletes remain in the dark. Connor Smith has this report.
Until recently, college athletes could not be compensated beyond scholarships. But the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA, changed that after a June ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court said such policies violate antitrust laws. Now, American student athletes can be paid under a rule known as NIL, which stands for name, image, and likeness, for things like autographs, advertisements, or merchandise. But the rule's impact on international student athletes isn't clear yet.
I mean, I don't get the difference between international student athlete and American besides nationality, but at the end of the day, we all humans, all athletes. Like, I don't get how your nationality should play a role.
Student visas held by players like Terrence Fall, a native of France, limit how much foreign students can earn. If the football player at Brigham Young University profited from his NIL, it could jeopardize his visa status to remain in the U.S. Immigration attorney Rob Seeger has advised universities and athletic programs. He says international student athletes should handle the new rule with caution.
Really be careful about it, because, you know, a lot of players come here. They're not only here to gain their education, but, you know, depending on your sport, eventually maybe get, you know, looked at, drafted, and moved to another piece. You just don't want to do anything to impact your future in the short term.
Sports attorney Dan Lust says if an international student athlete receives payment, it could impact their eligibility to play and their immigration status.
I think it's a very slippery slope, and anytime, right, you don't have the answer to a question and your eligibility is at stake, potentially your status to stay in America is at stake, I think you stay clear of these things.
Fall says he is confident that NIL rules will eventually allow international athletes to be paid, but plans to move carefully if he is offered a deal.
I would talk to them and then see what are my rights and what I'm able to do. And then if it ends up saying that it would affect my playing of football, then I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't put no money over football.
Universities have been unable to offer guidance because the position of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services remains murky.
They just don't know what the government, you know, meaning immigration, is, how they're ultimately going to come down on this.
Lust says all students, domestic and international, should be careful when considering an NIL deal.
So nothing is set in stone, and you really should be questioning everything that you assign and really assuming nothing.
Connor Smith for VOA News, Washington.
Zimbabwe's first black swimmer participating in an Olympic swim event, Donata Katai, showed promise in Tokyo despite being eliminated before reaching the semifinals of the 100-meter backstroke. The 17-year-old represents a breakthrough not only for Zimbabwe, but also for long underrepresented black swimmers.
Well, I started swimming when I was 6 because we had like an infant swimming gala at the school I was at.
The Southern African nation of Zimbabwe sent a black swimmer to the Olympics, the first from her country to go to the Games. Despite failing to reach the semifinals of the 100-meter backstroke, Katai recorded her personal best at the Aquatic Center in Tokyo, Japan. 17-year-old Donata Githui won African youth titles and broke youth records once held by two-time Olympic champion Kirsty Coventry, who is not only Zimbabwe's most successful swimmer, but also Africa's most decorated Olympian.
I think the first record I broke when I was 8 at the Les Brown pool was probably the most memorable one for me.
Which one was that?
33 yards butterfly. Yeah, because obviously that's when I kind of realized that I was, good at swimming.
Tokyo might have been too early for the teenager to succeed, but for now, Githui does represent a deeper breakthrough for Zimbabwe. Simone Manuel's gold medal in the 100-meter freestyle at the last Olympics in Rio de Janeiro was a seminal moment for Black swimmers. The American success sparked a conversation about why Black swimmers are so underrepresented. That's historically been the case in Southern Africa, where most successful swimmers like Coventry and South Africa's Chad Lacrosse and Carmen van der Berg are all white. But while swimming in the United States might still be struggling to diversify, Githui said it isn't anymore in Zimbabwe.
I feel like we swim in some very different environments, because in America, obviously, there's not many people of color that swim, whereas in Zimbabwe, I'd say the majority of people who swim at the moment are people of color. So I guess her story would be very different from mine in that like place. Because I wouldn't say I'm part of a minority group in Zimbabwe.
Githuy's talent has drawn some of the country's top coaches since the age of 8. Her current coach, Kathy Lobb, said Githui is the first swimmer she has taken all the way to the Olympics.
Each child is an individual, and yes, she does the same stroke as Kirsty, and she's happened to have broken Kirsty's couple of records. But yeah, each child's an individual, and I certainly am not comparing her to Kirsty. I think who knows, when she goes to university, she may well change strokes altogether. In America, they pull people onto the team according to what stroke they need. And she's got a very good butterfly as well. At the South Africa Junior Champs, she's won several medals in both backstroke and butterfly.
Tokyo was a pure excitement for Githui, and her swimming career has just begun.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.